"We all want you," the widow sisters confessed, surrounding a virgin Amish man in his cabin. Snow pounds the mountains. Inside a lone cabin, a quiet blacksmith bows his head in prayer until the door bursts open. 7 widows, half frozen and desperate, stumble inside. Their words shake him to the core. "We all want you, but this isn't about love. It's about survival. The railroad wants their land. The town whispers scandal. And the man who has never touched a woman is now their only shield against hunger, shame, and ruin. When a child's fever threatens to take her last breath, he rides into the storm for help. But the deeper he goes, the more dangerous secrets rise: corrupt deeds, forged papers, and a railroad foreman ready to crush them all. Can a man who has vowed purity stand against a world set on breaking him? And when 7 voices call out for his protection, will faith be enough to keep them safe? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The wind howled like a wounded beast, rattling the cabin's shutters as William Yoder stood frozen, his calloused hands gripping the edge of his simple wooden table. The 7 sisters huddled near his pot-bellied stove, their snow-dusted shawls dripping onto the rough-hewn floorboards. The smallest flames from his cooking fire cast dancing shadows on their weary faces. I don't understand," William stammered, his plain black hat clutched against his chest. The words they'd spoken seemed to echo in the cramped space. "We all want you." William. Sarah, the eldest of the sisters at 43, stepped forward. Her gray-streaked hair was coming loose from its tight bun, and her eyes held both strength and desperation. "Mr. Yoder, we know what we're asking might shock a God-fearing man such as yourself. But please hear us out." William nodded slowly, his throat tight. The beans bubbled in their pot, filling the air with their humble aroma. Outside, the storm raged on, bringing an early darkness to the winter evening. The railroad company, Hannah, the second eldest, spoke up, her voice bitter as winter bark. "They're trying to take our land. Say our men never finished paying their claims before the accident." She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter. "We got nothing left but those pieces of earth our husbands died working." Mary, barely 22 and still wearing her black mourning dress, wiped at her eyes. "The foreman, he comes around every week now. Says we got no right to stay, being unmarried women and all." The fire crackled, and William moved automatically to stir the beans, his mind churning like creek waters after a storm. The sisters watched him, their faces reflecting varying degrees of hope and fear. "What you're suggesting," William chose his words carefully, mindful of his Amish upbringing, "it ain't proper. 7 wives? That's not the Lord's way." Rebecca, her face still bearing the softness of youth despite her widow's grief, spoke gently. "We're not asking for love, Mr. Yoder, or even marriage in the eyes of men. Just protection. A name to keep the railroad at bay. We can work," Ruth added quickly, her hands rough from labor. "We know how to tend gardens, preserve food, make soap. Everything needed to keep a household running." William's eyes traveled around his simple cabin, the single bed in the corner, the worn Bible on its stand, the anvil and forge tools that were his life's work. He'd always known loneliness in his solitary life, but this was something else entirely. The railroad foreman, Elizabeth, the quiet one, spoke up unexpectedly. "He's been asking questions about you too. About your land claim." That made William's head snap up. He'd heard rumors of the railroad's expansion plans, but hadn't given them much thought. His piece of land, while modest, sat at a crucial point in the valley. "They're picking us off one by one," Sarah explained, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "First the widows, then the single folks. Anyone who can't fight back." She met William's eyes. "But together, we might have a chance." The wind rattled the door in its frame, making them all jump. William moved to check that the latch was secure, buying himself a moment to think. The sister's presence filled his small cabin with an energy he'd never known, part desperation, part determination, and something else he couldn't quite name. "You all understand what you're asking?" he finally said, turning back to face them. "This ain't just about putting my name on some papers. The town folk, they'll talk. The church elders. We understand sacrifice, Mr. Yoder," Sarah interrupted softly. "We've buried our husbands. We've watched our children go hungry. Pride is a luxury we can't afford anymore." William walked to his shelf and picked up his Bible, running his fingers over its worn leather cover. His father's voice echoed in his memory, speaking of duty and righteousness. But there were other teachings too, about helping those in need, about standing against injustice. The beans were ready now, their rich smell filling the cabin. Without speaking, William began taking down extra bowls, simple pottery he'd traded for horseshoes last spring. One by one, he filled them, laying out spoons and breaking his single loaf of bread into 8 pieces. "Sit," he said quietly, gesturing to the table and the few chairs he owned. Some of the sisters would have to stand, but none complained. "We'll eat first, then we'll talk more about this matter." They bowed their heads as William said grace, his voice trembling slightly as he added a prayer for guidance. The storm continued its assault outside, but in the cabin, there was only the sound of spoons against bowls and the occasional crackle of the fire, as 8 souls shared a meal and contemplated a future none of them had ever imagined. The pale winter dawn crept through William's window, finding him on his knees beside his narrow bed. His legs ached from the long night of prayer, but his mind felt clearer than it had since the sisters' arrival. The storm had softened to gentle snowfall. Though the wind still bit sharp and cold. William pulled on his heavy coat and stepped outside, wooden bucket in hand. The creek's song was muffled under sheets of ice, but he could hear water moving beneath. As he knelt in the snow to break through the frozen surface, his breath clouded before him like morning smoke from his forge. The cold water stung his hands as he filled the bucket. Looking up at his cabin, he could see shapes moving behind the frost-covered windows. The sisters were already awake. The weight of their presence, their desperate plea, pressed on his heart like a smith's hammer on hot iron. Standing up straight, bucket heavy in his grip, William spoke quietly to the morning air. "Lord, guide my words." He squared his shoulders and walked back to the cabin. Inside, the sisters huddled around the rekindled fire. Sarah looked up first, her eyes questioning. William set down the water bucket and cleared his throat. "I've done much thinking and praying," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You may stay through winter, all of you." Before their relief could bubble over, he raised his hand. "But there must be rules." "Anything," Mary whispered, clutching her shawl tight. William gestured to the cabin's layout. "We'll arrange separate sleeping areas. The main room for you sisters, with proper screens for modesty. I'll take the storage room." He pointed to the small space where he kept his tools. "There will be shared chores, cooking, cleaning, fetching water. And we'll have daily prayer, morning and evening." Sarah stood, speaking for them all. "We accept your terms, Mr. Yoder. God bless you for your kindness." Tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. The other sisters wept too, quiet tears of relief mixing with soft prayers of thanksgiving. Hannah moved to the fireplace, already reaching for William's flour bin. "I'll start bread for us all," she said, her hands steady despite her emotion. The day unfolded like a flower reaching for sun. Rebecca and Ruth hung damp skirts near the fire, the steam rising like morning mist. Elizabeth and Mary organized bedding into neat pallets, while Sarah directed the arrangement of what few possessions they'd carried. Through the storm. William watched them work as he split wood outside, the rhythmic thunk of his axe keeping time with their movements. By afternoon, the cabin had transformed. The sisters moved with purpose, their grief still present, but softened by hope. As evening approached, the smell of fresh bread filled the air. The sisters gathered around the table, their voices lifting in familiar hymns. William joined them, his deep bass supporting their sweet harmonies. The cabin glowed with warmth and lamplight, so different from his usual solitary suppers. Later, needing a moment of quiet, William stepped outside. Stars pierced the clear night sky like ice crystals, and the snow reflected their light. He breathed deeply, trying to still the strange mix of peace and unease in his heart. The crunch of hooves in snow broke the silence. A rider emerged from the darkness, his oilskin coat gleaming dully in the starlight. William recognized him, the railroad foreman, a man whose name he'd never learned but whose reputation cast a long shadow. The horse stopped, steam rising from its flanks. The foreman's face was hidden in the shadow of his hat brim, but his voice cut sharp as a blade. "Evening, Yoder." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Word travels fast, even in snow. Those are company widows you're harboring." William stood straighter, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "They are guests in my home." The foreman's laugh held no warmth. "Guests? Those women signed contracts. Yoder, their husbands' debts ain't settled." He shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. "Railroad's been good to you, ain't it? Regular work shoeing horses, fixing wagons. Be a shame if those contracts dried up." William's hands clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice level. "Is that a threat, friend?" "Just business." The foreman gathered his reins. "Think careful about whose side you're on, blacksmith. Railroads got long memory and longer reach." Without waiting for response, the foreman wheeled his horse around and rode away. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the night, leaving William alone with the stars and his pounding heart. Through the cabin window, he could hear the sisters' voices raised in another hymn. The light spilling out seemed suddenly fragile against the vast darkness, like a candle flame in a winter wind. William woke before sunrise, his mind already turning to the day's work ahead. The sisters needed to learn survival skills quickly. Winter showed no signs of softening its grip. He pulled on his boots and coat, stepping out into the crisp morning air. One by one, the sisters emerged from the cabin, wrapped in shawls against the cold. William demonstrated how to split logs properly, positioning his axe with careful precision. "Mind the grain of the wood," he explained, bringing the blade down in a smooth arc. The log split with a satisfying crack. Sarah stepped forward first, accepting the axe with determination in her eyes. Her first swing went wide, barely grazing the wood. William adjusted her grip gently, showing her how to stand. "Like this," he said softly. "Let the weight of the axe do the work." Rebecca watched from the cabin door, a smile playing at her lips. My, Mr. Yoder. Quite the patient teacher you are." Her teasing tone brought color to William's cheeks, but he kept his composure, focusing on Sarah's improving technique. Inside, Mary and Hannah worked at mending torn blankets, their needles flashing in the firelight. Elizabeth taught young Jane how to card wool, while Ruth stirred a pot of morning porridge. The cabin hummed with quiet industry, so different from the raw grief of their arrival. Days passed in steady rhythm. William showed them how to bank coals properly, how to read weather in the clouds, how to repair loose shingles. Each task seemed to lift a small weight from the sisters' shoulders, replacing despair with purpose. When Sunday arrived, William gathered them around the worn family Bible he'd brought from Pennsylvania. His deep voice filled the cabin as he read from Psalm 68, "A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling." The sisters' voices rose clear and strong in familiar hymns. "Amazing Grace" drifted out across the snow-covered yard, followed by "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." Even little Thomas, usually restless, sat quietly in his mother's lap, listening to the music. That evening, as William tended the fire, a rich stew of rabbit and winter vegetables simmered in the iron pot. He heard whispered voices from the corner where Elizabeth and Mary sat mending. "The foreman came by again yesterday," Elizabeth murmured, her needle pausing in its work. said the railroads claiming our land for unpaid debts. But James paid every penny he owed them. I saw the papers myself. Hush now, Mary replied, but her voice trembled. We can't trouble Mr. Yoder with this. He's done so much already. William's heart grew heavy, but he spoke up from his place by the fire. Your troubles are my troubles now, he said firmly. We'll face this together with God's help. His steady words seemed to comfort them, though his own mind churned with worry about the railroad's threats. 3 days later, Thomas's feverish crying pierced the pre-dawn darkness. Elizabeth cradled her son, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, but nothing seemed to help. His small body burned with fever, his breathing labored and rough. William knew what he had to do. As the first gray light touched the eastern sky, he pulled on his heaviest coat and wrapped his scarf tight. I'm going for Kim, he told Sarah, who stood anxiously by Thomas's bedside. She knew what to do. The sisters had heard of the Navajo healer woman who lived 3 miles away. Some settlers spoke against her, but William had seen her gentle wisdom with his own eyes when she'd helped treat injured railroad workers. He saddled his mule, Martha, with careful hands. The trail to Kim's hogan would be treacherous in the deep snow, but he had no choice. Thomas's fever was climbing dangerously high. The wind cut through his coat as Martha picked her way carefully along the snow-packed trail. William leaned forward in the saddle, scanning for landmarks half buried in white. The journey that usually took an hour stretched into 2 as they navigated drifts and icy patches. Finally, he spotted smoke rising from Kim's hogan. Martha's sides heaved with effort as they approached. William's fingers were nearly numb as he dismounted and knocked on the wooden door. Kim opened it, her dark eyes taking in his frost-covered appearance. Before he could speak, she said, Someone is sick. Yes, William replied, his breath clouding in the cold air. A child, Thomas. He burns with fever. Please, will you come? Kim stood in her doorway, her dark eyes reflecting wisdom beyond words. The warmth from her fire beckoned William inside, away from the biting cold. Come, she said simply, gesturing to a woven blanket near the flames. Rest while I prepare. William sank down gratefully, his bones aching from the hard ride. Kim moved with deliberate grace around her hogan, selecting dried herbs from bundles hanging from the rafters. Her fingers worked swiftly, measuring and mixing with practiced precision. The child burns with fever? She asked, crushing leaves between her palms. Yes, William replied, watching her work. Since before dawn. Nothing we tried would cool him. Kim nodded, carefully pouring the crushed herbs into a small leather pouch. Brew this with hot water, just enough to cover. Let it steep until the water turns golden. She tied the pouch with sinew, her movements precise. But listen carefully. The journey back may worsen his fever. The cold wind is no friend to sick children. William accepted the medicine pouch with trembling hands. How can I repay your kindness? Kim shook her head. There is no payment needed for helping a child. She paused, studying his face. You carry many burdens now, William Yoder, but you do not carry them alone. The ride back seemed longer, each gust of wind cutting through his coat like knives. William hunched over Martha's neck, one hand pressed against the precious pouch tucked inside his shirt. The mule picked her way carefully through deepening snow, her breath steaming in the frozen air. When they finally reached the cabin, several of the sisters rushed out to meet him. Sarah took Martha's reins while Elizabeth helped William dismount, his legs stiff from cold. Quick now, he said, pulling out the medicine pouch. We need hot water. Ruth already had the kettle boiling. They followed Kim's instructions exactly, watching as the herbs steeped and the water slowly turned golden. Mary cradled Thomas while Elizabeth spooned the warm liquid carefully into his mouth. Through the long night, they took turns sitting with the boy. William stayed awake, watching Thomas's chest rise and fall, offering silent prayers. The sisters moved quietly around him, changing cool cloths on the child's forehead. Humming soft hymns. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Thomas's breathing eased. His skin, which had burned so hot, began to cool. Elizabeth pressed her hand to his forehead and burst into tears of relief. "The fever's broken," she whispered. "Thank God and Kim's medicine." Joy spread through the cabin like sunrise. The sisters embraced, laughing and crying at once. William bowed his head, overwhelmed by gratitude and exhaustion. To celebrate Thomas's recovery, the sisters insisted on preparing a special meal. Mary mixed cornmeal with the last of their butter, while Hannah stirred a rich stew of preserved vegetables and dried beef. The smell of baking bread filled the cabin, mixing with the lingering scent of Kim's healing herbs. William tried to help, but Rebecca shooed him toward the table. "You have done enough," she said firmly. "Now sit and rest." The meal tasted all the sweeter for their shared relief. William watched the sisters pass dishes around the table, their faces glowing in the afternoon light. Thomas sat in his mother's lap, weak but alert enough to nibble on soft bread soaked in stew. As evening settled in, Sarah lit the oil lamp while Ruth stoked the fire. The familiar tasks of ending the day brought comfort after their long vigil. Mary began humming "Sweet Hour of Prayer," and soon the other sisters joined in. "Come, Mr. Yoder," Hannah called, patting the bench beside her. "Surely you know this one." William hesitated, ducking his head shyly. But their warm smiles drew him in, and he found himself adding his voice to theirs. His deep bass wove through their sweet harmony, filling the cabin with music that seemed to chase away the shadows. For the first time since the sisters arrived at his door, William felt truly at peace. The cabin had transformed from his solitary refuge into something warmer, a home filled with family. Yet even as he joined in another hymn, the railroad foreman's threats echoed in the back of his mind. He pushed the dark thoughts away, focusing instead on the present moment. Thomas safe in his mother's arms, the sisters' voices rising in song, and the blessed feeling of belonging that wrapped around them all like a warm blanket. The days grew shorter as winter tightened its grip on the Colorado foothills. Snow piled deeper around William's cabin, forming pristine drifts that sparkled in the pale sunlight. Inside, warmth and purpose filled the once lonely space as William taught the sisters the skills they needed to survive. "Like this," he demonstrated, his strong hands working a worn leather strap. "The needle must go through at an angle to hold properly." Sarah watched intently, her fingers mimicking his movements as she learned to mend the broken. Harness. Rebecca and Mary worked together patching the roof, following William's careful instructions. He steadied the ladder while they climbed up, carrying supplies and determination. "Press the tar paper down firm," he called up to them. "Make sure it overlaps the old piece by 3 inches. Each evening, William organized the woodpile, showing Hannah and Elizabeth how to stack the logs properly. "Cross them like so," he explained, "to let the air flow through. Wet wood won't burn right." The sisters nodded, their breath visible in the cold air as they worked. When darkness fell early, William would retreat to his corner of the cabin. There, by flickering candlelight, he wrote his prayers in a worn leather journal. His pen scratched quietly across the paper while the sisters gathered around the hearth, sharing their stories in hushed voices. "I still hear his voice in my dreams," Ruth confessed one night, her face illuminated by the fire's glow. Singing hymns on Sunday morning, strong and clear as sunshine, Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. "Thomas never knew," she whispered, shame coloring her words. "The gambling debts he left behind. I found the papers after." Her voice trailed off as Elizabeth wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulders. In the shadows, Margaret wiped tears from her eyes as her young son slept fitfully nearby. "He asks when we'll have real bread again," she said softly. "I tell him soon," but the fear in his eyes. The sisters' stories wove together like a patchwork quilt, each piece different but joining to create something stronger. William listened from his corner, his heart heavy with their burdens yet lifted by their courage. Peace settled over the cabin like fresh, Snow, until hoofbeats shattered the quiet one bitter afternoon. William looked up from teaching Ruth how to shape a bent nail straight again. Through the frosted window, he saw 3 riders approaching, the railroad foreman flanked by 2 deputies. The sisters gathered close as William stepped out to meet them. Wind whipped at his coat as he stood firm on his porch, watching the men rein in their horses. The foreman's laugh cut through the cold air. "Well, if it ain't the holy man and his harem." He swept his arm toward the cabin window where the sisters' faces showed pale and worried. "Town's already talking. Yoder, quite the scandal you're brewing up here." William's voice remained steady, though his hands clenched at his sides. "These women are under my protection." "Nothing more. Protection?" The foreman spat into the snow. "That what you call it? 7 widows living under one man's roof?" He leaned forward in his saddle, eyes glinting. "Company owns this land, Yoder. Got the papers to prove it. These women need to clear out. They stay until spring," William declared, drawing himself up straighter. "They have nowhere else to go." The foreman exchanged dark looks with his deputies. "Then spring will bring lawmen," he promised coldly. "And they won't be as understanding as we are." He wheeled his horse around, snow flying from its hooves. "Clock's ticking, Yoder. Choose wisely." William watched them ride away, their threats hanging in the frozen air like icicles. Behind him, he heard the cabin door open. Elizabeth stepped out, laying a gentle hand on his arm. "We won't let you face this alone," she said softly. William nodded, his jaw set with determination. "The Lord defends the cause of widows," he quoted quietly. "We will trust in his protection." Together they returned to the warmth of the cabin, where the other sisters waited. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the tracks of the foreman's threats in pure white silence. The snow fell relentlessly for days, building drifts taller than a man against William's cabin walls. Each morning brought new battles against nature's fury. William and the sisters took turns breaking through the thick ice at the creek, their breath freezing in clouds as they chopped and hauled water back to the cabin. "Mind your footing," William cautioned as he steadied Sarah on the slit path. Her arms trembled under the weight of the water bucket, but determination showed in her eyes. The old mule needed constant care. Elizabeth and Mary worked together, breaking trails through knee-deep snow to reach the lean-to where he stood. They brushed ice from his coat and made sure he had fresh hay. Their hands red with cold, despite their mittens. Inside the cabin, rations grew thinner. William divided their stores carefully, ensuring everyone got an equal share. The sisters stretched what they had, making thin soups from dried beans and carefully portioning out the remaining flour for bread. "The Lord provides," Rebecca would say softly as she set the table each evening. Though portions were small, gratitude filled their prayers to lift their spirits. They sang hymns after supper. William's deep voice joined the sisters' sweet harmonies as they sang, "Amazing Grace" and "Be Thou My Vision." The music seemed to warm the cabin more than the fire. Travelers passing through brought troubling news. That railroad foreman's been spreading stories in town. A tin peddler warned as he warmed himself by their fire. "Says terrible things about the goings-on up here." William's heart grew heavy with each new report. At night, he knelt beside his bed, wrestling in prayer. "Lord, you know my heart," he whispered. "But how can I protect these women if the town believes such slander?" His reputation as an honest, God-fearing man had always been beyond reproach. Now whispers of scandal threatened not just his standing but his very faith. Yet when he saw the grateful smiles of the sisters as they worked together, his resolve strengthened. Their trust in him was pure, their need genuine. He could not abandon them to satisfy town gossip. One evening, as twilight painted the snow purple, a familiar figure appeared at their door. Kim stood wrapped in thick blankets, her dark eyes concerned above her scarf. She carried a heavy pack. "The spirits guided me here," she said simply as William welcomed her inside. The sisters gathered eagerly around as she unpacked dried herbs and several precious pounds of cornmeal. After they had shared a simple meal, Kim's expression grew serious. "There is trouble coming," she warned, her voice low. "I have heard things in town. The railroad man visits the county clerk often, always after sunset." William leaned forward. "What do they plan?" "The clerk takes gold coins to change papers," Kim explained. "He marks new names on old deeds. Soon he will claim the sisters' land belongs to the railroad." She pulled a worn ledger from her pack. "This shows the true records, copied before the changes began. Guard it well." The sisters exchanged alarmed looks. "Can they really steal our land so easily?" Margaret asked, holding her sleeping son closer. "Not if we expose their lies," William answered firmly. His quiet voice carried steel beneath its gentleness, and Tim nodded approval. "Truth is like water," she said. "It finds its way through stone." She rose to leave, adjusting her blankets against the cold. The sisters rushed to embrace her. "Thank you for warning us," Elizabeth said, pressing Kim's hands warmly. After Kim disappeared into the gathering darkness, William sat at his table, studying the ledger by lamplight. The sisters gathered around him, their faces determined. "We stand with you," Sarah declared. "Whatever comes, the Lord defends the cause of widows," Ruth added softly. "And so will we defend each other." William traced the neat columns of names and dates in the ledger, his mind working through possibilities. The fight ahead would test everything he believed about faith, justice, and courage. But looking at the loyal faces surrounding him, he knew he would not face it alone. He knew he would not face it alone. The lamp cast a steady glow across the pages as William continued studying the records, searching for the truth that would protect their fragile family. Outside, the wind whispered through snow-laden pines, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate across the vast white silence. The pale winter sun had barely crested the horizon when William led his mule from the lean-to. His breath frosted in the dawn air as he tightened the saddle straps with fingers stiff from cold. Sarah, the eldest of the widow sisters, emerged from the cabin wrapped in her thickest shawl. "I'm ready," she said quietly, accepting William's help onto the mule's back. At 62, her joints protested the early morning chill, but determination showed in every line of her weathered face. William took the reins and began leading them down the snow-packed trail toward town. The journey stretched before them, 15 miles of treacherous terrain made worse by winter's grip. They moved slowly, William careful to guide the mule around patches of ice hidden beneath fresh snowdrop by midday. The sun offered little warmth against the biting wind. They paused briefly to share the bread and dried apples the other sisters had packed for them. Sarah's hands trembled as she ate, the whether from cold or anxiety. William couldn't tell. "The Lord goes before us," he reminded her gently, helping her remount. The county office sat at the edge of town, a squat building of weathered boards and foggy windows. William helped Sarah dismount, steadying her as she found her footing on the icy ground. Inside, the pot-bellied stove offered little comfort against the chill reception they received. The county clerk looked up from his desk, his round face immediately showing discomfort. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's chill. "Mr. Yoder," he said stiffly, "what brings you to town?" "We've come about the widow's land deeds," William replied, his voice steady but firm. Sarah stood straight beside him, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. The clerk's collar seemed to tighten around his neck. "Those deeds were properly transferred to the railroad company," he said, shuffling papers on his desk. "All legal and binding." "Show us," William demanded, reluctantly. The clerk produced several documents, laying them out with trembling hands. Sarah stepped forward, adjusting her spectacles as she examined the papers. "These signatures," she gasped. "They're not right. My Henry never made his H like that, and Mary's Thomas always wrote his full middle name." Her voice shook with outrage. These are false. William's jaw tightened as he studied the clearly forged signatures. This is theft through deception, he declared, meeting the clerk's nervous gaze. We will contest these documents. The clerk's face reddened, but his voice took on a sneering tone. Contest all you want, Mr. Yoder. The courts have always favored the railroad. Who do you think they'll believe, a group of penniless widows and an Amish blacksmith, or the company bringing progress to the territory? William gathered the courage to lean forward, his voice low but firm. They will believe the truth if we must shout it from every rooftop in Colorado. The ride home seemed longer, with only moonlight to guide their way. The mule picked carefully along the trail while Sarah huddled against the cold. William walked beside them, his mind churning with worry even as he spoke words of comfort. We have Kim's ledger, he reminded. Sarah, and your testimony about the signatures. God's truth will prevail. I pray you're right, Sarah whispered, her voice nearly lost in the wind. Those poor sisters have lost so much already. It was nearly midnight when they finally glimpsed lamplight through the cabin windows. The other sisters must have been watching, for the door flew open before William could even call out. They rushed to help Sarah down, surrounding her with worried questions. Come inside first, William instructed, leading the mule to shelter before joining them. The cabin was warm from the well-tended fire, and someone had kept soup simmering. As Sarah sipped from a steaming cup, she and William related their confrontation with the clerk. The sisters' faces showed a mix of anger and fear as they heard about the forged signatures. What can we do? Young Rebecca asked, clutching her sleeping child closer. William stood before the fire, his shadow tall against the log walls. Though his own faith trembled within him, he kept his voice steady. We will not bow to liars, he declared. The Lord abhors false witness. We will fight this forgery with truth. The sisters gathered around him, joining hands in a circle. William led them in prayer, asking for strength, wisdom, and justice. They remained linked together until exhaustion began to overtake them, some nodding where they sat. Rest now, William said softly, helping Sarah to her bed in the corner. Tomorrow we begin gathering evidence. The sisters settled into their sleeping areas, but their whispered prayers continued long into the night, mixing with the crackle of the dying fire and the winter winds moan around the cabin's corners. Days stretched into a quiet rhythm of survival and preparation. William rose before dawn each morning, breaking ice from the water barrel and stoking the cabin's hungry fire. The widows matched his determination, each finding ways to strengthen their makeshift family against winter's grip. Like this, William demonstrated, showing Martha how to split logs along their grain. The axe handle felt foreign in her work-worn hands, but she soon found the right angle. Pride brightened her face as the wood cracked cleanly. Inside the cabin, Rebecca and Sarah worked on piecing together quilts from saved scraps of their old life. Their nimble fingers stitched stories into each square, a piece of Thomas's Sunday shirt here, little Joseph's outgrown pants there. The other sisters took turns at the spinning wheel William had traded for, turning sheep's wool into rough but sturdy yarn. We'll need warm socks, Practical Jane observed. If we're to fight through spring. William began teaching them basic blacksmith skills. Knowing such knowledge might mean survival. He set up a small forge near the cabin's lee side, where the wind couldn't steal the heat. The sisters gathered round, eyes wide as he demonstrated how to heat and shape iron. Hand me that hammer, he instructed Ruth, the youngest widow. Now watch, not too hard, just enough to shape the nail's head. Sparks flew as metal struck metal, and unexpected laughter burst from Ruth's throat at her first successful attempt. I never thought I'd be doing a man's work, she admitted, studying the crude but serviceable nail in her hand. It's God's work, William corrected gently. And he gives strength where it's needed. They fashioned rough runners for a snow sled, the sisters taking turns at the forge while William guided their efforts. The cabin rang with the rhythm of hammer strikes and shared purpose. Yet beneath their industry, Tension coiled like a spring. Travelers passing through brought whispers from town tales of William's supposed impropriety, rumors of the railroad's growing influence. One evening, as purple dusk settled over the snow-laden hills, Kim's familiar figure appeared on the trail. This time she wasn't alone. A young Navajo boy, perhaps 12 years old, walked beside her, his dark eyes serious in his wind-chapped face. William met them at the door, beckoning them toward the fire's warmth. The sisters gathered close, sensing importance in this visit. "This is Running Deer," Kim introduced the boy in her soft, measured voice. "He has something to tell you about the railroad foreman." Running Deer spoke in careful English, his words carrying the weight of truth. 2 weeks passed. I was gathering kindling near the saloon. The big man, the foreman, he was drunk, bragging to his friends. The boy's eyes met William's steadily. He laughed about how easy it was to make new papers, new marks that looked like dead men's writing. Said no judge would believe widows over railroad company men. Hope kindled in William's chest, though he kept his voice calm. "You would speak this truth before others?" "Before a judge." Running Deer nodded solemnly. "My father teaches that lies poison the land. Truth must be spoken." The widows exchanged glances, years of hardship and loss written in their faces. Sarah stepped forward, speaking for them all. "William," she said, her voice trembling but determined, "we fear losing our land more than we fear hunger. Our husbands died working that ground. It's all we have left to give our children." One by one, the other sisters voiced their agreement. Even shy Mary found courage to speak. "We'll fight beside you, William, whatever it costs us." Kim and Running Deer departed with promises to return when needed, leaving behind a precious gift, hope, fragile as a first spring blossom. William saw them safely down the trail, then walked a little further into the gathering night. Stars pricked through the darkening sky, countless as God's promises. William knelt in the snow, unmindful of the cold seeping through his trousers. His prayer rose like steam in the frigid air. "Lord," he whispered, "guide our path through this valley. Give us strength to stand for truth. Protect these women who've trusted their lives to my care. Let justice prevail against those who would profit from widows' tears." The wind carried his words away, but peace settled in his heart. Whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together, this unlikely family bound by faith and common cause. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow when 3 riders approached William's cabin. Their horses' hooves crunched through the frozen crust, breaking the peaceful stillness. William recognized the railroad foreman's broad-shouldered silhouette, flanked by 2 deputies wearing worn badges on their heavy coats. The widows gathered at the window, their faces tight with worry. Little Joseph clung to his mother's skirts. Sensing the tension in the air, William stepped onto the porch, his Bible held steady in his weathered hands. The foreman's horse stamped impatiently, sending puffs of steam into the cold air. "Yoder," the foreman called out, his voice sharp as an icicle. "Time's up. These women need to clear out, or you'll be facing arrest for harboring fugitives and moral indecency." William's quiet voice carried across the yard. "These sisters are under God's protection and mine." He opened his Bible to a marked page, the leather binding creaking in the stillness. "Shall I read what the Lord says about those who oppress widows?" The foreman spat into the snow. "Save your preaching. We've got the law on our side. Cursed be anyone who perverts the justice due to the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow." William's words rang clear in the winter air. And all the people shall say, "Amen." The cabin door creaked open behind him. One by one, the widow sisters emerged, forming a line across the porch. Sarah held her head high, while Martha's hands were clasped in silent prayer. Even timid Mary stood firm, though her fingers trembled. The deputies shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. The younger one touched the brim of his hat, avoiding the widow's steady gaze. "Ma'am," the older deputy said, addressing Sarah, We don't mean no disrespect to you ladies. But nothing, Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the strength of 7 women's grief. Our husbands died building your railroad. The company promised to care for us. Instead, you forged papers and spread lies about this good man who's shown us Christian charity. William noticed the younger deputy's face flush at the mention of forged papers. The man looked away, shame written clear across his features. The older deputy cleared his throat. We'll need proper orders from the judge before taking any action here. He turned to the foreman. Best we do this legal and proper like. The foreman's face darkened like a thunderhead. You're both gutless wonders. He yanked his horse's head around, making the animal dance sideways. This ain't over, Yoder. Your precious reputation's already in tatters. No decent folk will hire a man who keeps 7 women under his roof. The truth of those words stung, but William stood unmoved. The foreman spurred his horse, sending clumps of snow flying as he galloped away. The deputies followed more slowly, the younger one casting a last uncertain glance over his shoulder. When the riders disappeared around the bend, William's shoulders sagged slightly. The widows surrounded him, their concern evident in their faces. William? Ruth touched his arm gently. What did he mean about hiring? Inside the cabin, they gathered around the scarred wooden table while William explained. The railroad's been busy. They've convinced most folks in town to cancel their smithing work. Brother Jacob's congregation won't send horses for shoeing anymore. Even the Miller family. He trailed off, pain evident in his voice. How long? Martha asked quietly. 3 weeks now. I've been using my savings, but... William's hands spread helplessly on the table. Rebecca stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. Then we'll work harder. I can sew for folks out past the railroad's reach. Jane's a fine cook, we could sell bread. I know how to card wool, Sarah added. And now that you've taught us basic smithing, sisters, William's voice was gentle but firm. You don't understand. Without steady work, I can't provide. We understand perfectly well, Martha interrupted. You're telling us to leave for our own good. Her eyes flashed with unexpected fire. Well, we won't go. Better to be poor together than cast out alone. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Mary, who rarely spoke, found her voice. You've shown us God's love through your actions, William. Now let us show you the same. Ruth moved to the shelf where they kept their few books and retrieved the worn hymnal. Without a word, she opened it and began to sing, her clear voice lifting in the familiar words of, Be Thou My Vision. One by one, the others joined in. William's deep bass anchored their harmony as darkness gathered outside the windows. They sang through their fear, through their weariness, through their uncertainty about tomorrow. When the last note faded, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the pop and crackle of the fire. Sleep would come soon enough, but for now, they drew strength from their shared faith and the warmth of belonging. The bitter January wind howled through gaps in the cabin's logs, making the oil lamp flicker. William stirred the morning's thin porridge, stretching the last of their oats with extra water. His stomach growled, reminding him they'd all been eating less these past weeks. Outside, fresh snow had drifted against the fence posts. William pulled his coat tight and trudged through knee-deep drifts to check his rabbit snares. The morning sun cast long blue shadows across the untouched white expanse. His breath frosted in the air as he followed the line of traps he'd set with Martha's help yesterday. The first 3 snares were empty. At the 4th, he found something that wasn't a rabbit, a piece of paper nailed to his fence post, fluttering in the wind. William's fingers trembled as he pulled the nail free and unfolded the message. The words were stark against the white paper. Eviction in spring. Surrender or face jail. He stood motionless, the threat heavy in his hands. Inside the cabin, he could hear the sisters starting their day. The scrape of the breakfast pot, little Joseph's laugh, someone humming a hymn. William carefully folded the note and tucked it deep in his coat pocket. They carried enough worry without this added burden. Later that morning, while splitting logs behind the cabin, William paused to catch his breath. The rhythmic thud of his axe had masked approaching footsteps in the snow. He heard Rebecca and Sarah's voices drift around the corner of the cabin. "Dear Lord," Rebecca whispered, "protect William from those who mean him harm. Give him strength to endure what's coming." Sarah's voice joined hers. "And wisdom to guide us all through these trials." William's axe remained frozen mid-swing, his heart aching at their concern. He'd tried to shield them from worry, but they sensed a growing danger. The choice weighed on him. Should he maintain their hope by keeping silent, or prepare them for the battles ahead? That evening, after a meager supper of cornbread and rabbit stew, the sisters gathered close to the fire. The usual evening chatter fell quiet when Martha cleared her throat. "I think it's time we spoke of them," she said softly. "Our husbands. How they died." William made to stand to give them privacy, but Ruth caught his sleeve. "Stay," she whispered. "You're family now. You should know." One by one, the sisters shared their stories. Sarah described how her Thomas had fallen from a trestle, how the company man hadn't even removed his hat when delivering the news. Rebecca spoke of her James, crushed between rail cars while coupling them. Martha's voice shook as she recalled finding her Daniel's broken body. After a boiler explosion, tears flowed freely as each widow honored her loss. William sat in reverent silence, his own eyes growing damp as their grief filled the cabin. Even little Joseph seemed to understand. Curling closer to his mother's side, the fire had burned low, casting deep shadows across their faces when William finally reached into his coat. The paper crackled as he withdrew it. "I found this today," he said quietly, holding out the threatening note. Sarah took it with trembling fingers. The other sisters leaned close to read in the dim light. Gasps and murmurs of dismay followed. "Jail?" Mary's voice quavered. "They wouldn't dare." "They would," William replied heavily. "The railroad has influence with the law." A tense silence fell. William watched the sisters exchange glances, seeing fear flicker across their faces. But then Rebecca straightened her shoulders. "Better to fight for truth than yield to thieves," she declared firmly. "Our husbands died building their fortune. We won't let them steal our dignity too." Nods of agreement circled the room. Martha reached for William's hand, her grip strong despite her age. "You've risked everything to shelter us," she said. "Now we stand together, come what may." The other sisters joined hands, forming an unbroken circle in the firelight. William felt their collective strength flow through that simple connection. Though hunger gnawed and threats loomed, their resolve had only grown stronger. "We'll need to be clever," Sarah said practically. "Store what food we can, prepare for spring, and pray," added Ruth. Prayers moved mountains before. William looked at each face in turn. These women who'd arrived at his door as desperate strangers and become his family. Their tears had dried, replaced by determination that warmed him more than any fire could. The wind rattled the windows, but inside their circle, hope burned steady and bright. Hope burned steady and bright. A warm wind swept through the valley, bringing with it the first hints of thaw. William stood at his cabin door, watching snow collapse into dirty patches of slush. The unexpected warmth had turned the yard into a maze of muddy pools, but it also meant the road to town might finally be passable. Martha, the eldest of the widow sisters, joined him at the threshold. Her weathered face carried both worry and determination. "The church records," she said softly. "If my Henry filed the deed there like he promised, we might have proof." William nodded, already reaching for his heavy coat. "We'll need to hurry. This thaw won't last long." They saddled William's sturdy mare, the beast stomping impatiently in the mud. The other sisters gathered to see them off, their faces pinched with anxiety. Little Joseph waved from his mother's arms as William helped Martha mount behind him. The journey into town was slow and treacherous. Melting snow had turned the dirt road into a rutted mess that sucked at the horses' hooves. Martha clung tight to William's waist as they picked their way carefully forward, the afternoon sun casting long shadows through bare trees. The church stood silent on the edge of town, its white clapboard walls stark against the gray sky. William tied the mare to the hitching post, helping Martha down. Her boots squelched in the mud as they approached the empty building. The heavy wooden door creaked open at William's touch. Inside, the sanctuary lay hushed and cool, smelling of dust and old hymnals. William struck a match to light the oil lamp hanging near the pulpit, its warm glow pushing back the shadows. The records would be in Reverend Miller's study, Martha whispered, as if afraid to break the sacred quiet. They made their way to the small room behind the altar, where shelves of leather-bound books lined the walls. William held the lamp high while Martha ran her finger along the spines. Parish records, marriage certificates. Here, the deed registry. She pulled a thick volume from its place, sending dust motes dancing in the lamplight. They laid the book on the Reverend's desk, carefully turning its brittle pages. Martha's hands trembled as she searched. Henry always said he'd made sure everything was proper, but after the accident, her voice caught. "Wait!" William pointed to an entry near the bottom of a page. "Look here." Martha squinted at the faded writing, then gasped. There it was, her Henry's careful signature, witnessed by the Reverend himself. The deed clearly stated the land belonged jointly to all 7 sisters, their names listed in neat rows. "Oh, thank the Lord," Martha breathed, pressing her hand to her heart. William carefully tore the page free, folding it reverently and tucking it inside his coat. Their relief was short-lived. As they stepped out of the study, a shadow filled the church doorway. The railroad foreman's bulk blocked the last rays of daylight, his face twisted in an ugly scowl. Well, he drawled, stepping into the sanctuary. "What have we here? A secret meeting in the house of God?" His boots echoed on the wooden floor as he advanced. William pushed Martha slightly behind him. "We're leaving now," he said firmly, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Not without showing me what you found." The foreman's eyes glittered dangerously. He lunged forward suddenly, meaty hands grasping for William's coat. William reacted instinctively, shoving the larger man backward. The foreman stumbled over a prayer bench, giving them precious seconds. William grabbed Martha's hand and they ran, their feet pounding down the church steps. The mare stomped nervously as William practically threw Martha into the saddle. He swung up behind her just as the foreman burst through the church door, roaring curses. William dug his heels into the horses' flanks, and they shot forward into the muddy street. Slush flew from the mare's hooves as they galloped, spattering their clothes with icy mud. William could hear the foreman's horse giving chase, but their lighter weight gave them an advantage in the treacherous conditions. They flew past the town limits, taking the twisting road at dangerous speed. Finally, the sound of pursuit faded. William slowed their pace, aware of how the mare's flanks heaved with exertion. Martha's grip on his waist gradually loosened. "Did we really find it?" she asked shakily. "It seems almost too good to be true." William patted his coat where the precious document lay safe. "The Lord provides," he said simply. The cabin came into view just as dusk was falling. The other sisters spilled out onto the porch at the sound of hoofbeats, their faces anxious. William helped Martha down, both of them mud-spattered and trembling with spent adrenaline, inside. They gathered around the rough wooden table as William carefully withdrew the folded page. He smoothed it flat in the lamplight, and 6 pairs of eyes widened as Martha explained what they'd found. "Your Henry thought of everything," William said gently, watching tears of relief roll down more than one cheek. "This is proof the land is yours, all of yours. Together." The sisters clasped hands around the table, hope blooming fresh in their tired faces. The precious document lay before them, a shield against the railroad's greed, a testament to their late husband's care. and a promise of justice to come. The morning after their church discovery dawned cold and gray. William had barely finished his morning prayers when thundering hoofbeats approached the cabin. A group of townspeople, led by the red-faced railroad foreman, surrounded the property. "Yoder!" the foreman bellowed. "Come face what you've done, you thieving Amish devil." William stepped onto the porch, his heart heavy, but his stance firm. The widows gathered behind him as the foreman waved a piece of paper. "This man," he shouted to the crowd, "has forged documents. Claims he found proof in the church, but we all know better. No honest man sneaks around holy ground after dark." Murmurs rippled through the gathered townsfolk. William saw doubt and suspicion in their eyes, mixed with the prejudice that had always followed his plain clothes and quiet ways. Before he could respond, 2 deputies rode up, their badges glinting dully in the weak morning light. "William Yoder," the older one announced, "you're summoned to appear before Judge Parker at the county office. Today." The youngest widow, Sarah, stepped forward. "We'll come with you, William. 2 of you," the deputy amended. "The rest stay here." Martha and Rachel, the statiest of the sisters, prepared to ride. The others huddled together, promising prayers. William helped the women mount their horses, aware of the hostile stares following their every move. The ride to town felt endless. Clouds hung low and threatening, matching the mood of their small procession. The deputies flanked them closely, hands never far from their weapons, as if expecting trouble from a man of peace. The county office was packed when they arrived. William helped Martha and Rachel dismount, their skirts muddied from the journey. Inside, townsfolk pressed against the walls, leaving only a narrow path to the judge's desk. The railroad foreman stood smugly near the front, the corrupt clerk hovering anxiously beside him. Judge Parker, a lean man with sharp eyes, called the hearing to order. The foreman immediately launched into his accusations, painting William as a schemer who had manufactured false documents to steal rail rent. William stood quietly, his head in his hands, waiting. Martha and Rachel's presence beside him gave him strength, though he could see tears threatening in their eyes. Just as the judge began to question William, the door opened. A hush fell over the room as Kim entered, her dignified bearing drawing all eyes. Behind her came the Navajo boy who had overheard the foreman's boasting. "Your Honor," Kim said clearly, "I have testimony you need to hear." The foreman's face darkened. "This is outrageous. You can't allow." "I will hear all evidence," Judge Parker interrupted firmly. Kim stepped forward. Her voice carried to every corner as she described overhearing the foreman, bragging about how easily he had arranged the theft of the widow's land. The boy then spoke, his quiet words devastating in their simplicity as he repeated the foreman's drunken confessions. The county clerk began to sweat visibly. His eyes darted between the foreman and the judge, his hands trembling as he clutched his ledger. William watched as Judge Parker examined the church document, comparing it to other records. The silence stretched thin as a wire as everyone waited. Finally, the judge looked up. Though his face showed reluctance, no doubt aware of the railroad's power, his voice was firm. "This deed is authentic. The land rights belong to the widow sisters, as recorded by their late husbands. Any attempt to seize or transfer these rights is hereby nullified." The foreman's face turned purple with rage. He slammed his fist on the desk. "You'll regret this," he snarled, storming toward the door. "All of you." The clerk scurried after him, but William barely noticed. Martha and Rachel had thrown their arms around him, weeping with relief. Kim smiled slightly, nodding once before she and the boys slipped away. The ride home felt lighter, despite the threatening sky above. The deputies, perhaps ashamed of their role, hung back. William led the 2 widows along the muddy road, their horses picking their way carefully. As they approached the cabin, William saw the other sisters spill out onto the porch. They must have been watching the road all day, waiting and praying. The moment the horses stopped, they surrounded William, Martha, and Rachel. The land is ours," Martha announced through happy tears. The judge confirmed it. The sisters embraced each other, then William, their joy overflowing. He stood somewhat awkwardly in their midst, unused to such demonstration but deeply moved by their gratitude. "The Lord is faithful," he said softly, watching as they continued to celebrate. Their tears flowed freely now, tears of relief, of vindication, of hope restored. The first warm breeze of spring whispered through the valley, carrying the promise of change. Patches of earth emerged from beneath melting snow, dark and rich with possibility. The creeks that had been frozen solid all winter now rushed with fresh snowmelt, their waters singing with renewed life. William stood at the edge of the widow's homestead, surveying the work ahead. Winter's harsh grip had taken its toll on the buildings and fences. With his sleeves rolled up, he guided the sisters in the essential repairs their property desperately needed. "Mind the grain of the wood," he instructed gently, showing them how to replace broken fence posts. His strong hands demonstrated the proper technique for securing the rails. The sisters watched attentively, their determination evident in their focused expressions. Throughout the days that followed, William hauled fresh-cut timber from the forest, the heavy logs leaving deep tracks in the softening ground. The eldest widow, Martha, organized the others into work parties, their skirts tied up as they helped clear winter debris and straighten sagging outbuildings. The change in the townspeople's attitude was subtle but unmistakable. Those who had once turned away now nodded in greeting when William passed. Some even stopped to offer help, perhaps seeking to ease their conscience after supporting the railroad schemes. The general store owner extended credit again, and the mill owner sent his sons to assist with the heaviest lifting. One peaceful evening, as the sun painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, William and the sisters sat outside the cabin. They watched in comfortable silence as wild geese flew overhead, their V formation pointing north like an arrow of hope. The air held the fresh scent of thaw and new grass. The widows exchanged meaningful glances before Martha cleared her throat. "William," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "we need to speak our hearts." The other sisters drew closer, their faces earnest in the fading light. "We cannot bear the thought of losing you," Sarah added softly. "You've become more than just our protector. We all want you." "William," they said together, echoing their words from that desperate winter night. But now their voices carried warmth instead of fear, affection instead of desperation. William's cheeks flushed pink in the twilight. He studied his rough hands for a long moment before raising his eyes to meet theirs. "I am humbled by your trust," he said quietly, "and I vow before God that I will never forsake you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I cannot marry. Not any one of you, nor all. Instead, if you will accept it, I offer myself as brother, as kin, as one who will guide and protect in the way of our Lord." The sisters' eyes glistened with tears, but their smiles showed understanding. "We would be blessed to have such a brother," Martha replied, speaking for them all. They sat together as darkness settled over the land, their hearts at peace with this new covenant between them. The warm spring sun bathed the freshly tilled earth in golden light. William stood beside the widow sisters, watching as they pressed seeds into the dark soil of their reclaimed land. The morning dew had burned away, leaving the ground perfectly ready for planting. "Like this," he demonstrated, creating neat furrows with practiced care. Not too deep, just enough to give the seeds a good start. The children darted between the fence posts, their laughter carrying across the fields. Their small feet kicked up puffs of dust as they chased each other, their faces bright with joy that only spring could bring. After the long winter's confinement, their spirits soared with newfound freedom. Near midday, Kim appeared on the path, her arms full of dried herbs and medicines. She moved with quiet dignity toward the group, nodding in greeting. "These are for strength," she said, offering bundles of sage and sweetgrass. "May your harvest be blessed, and may peace continue between our people." William accepted her gift with reverence. "We are grateful for your friendship," he replied, his voice sincere. The widows gathered close, each expressing thanks for Kim's support during their darkest days. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft purple and orange, William lit the lamps inside the cabin. Their gentle glow spilled out onto the porch where the family gathered. His deep voice lifted in the opening notes of a familiar hymn, and the widows joined in, their harmonies rising sweet and clear in the evening air. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," they sang together, their voices carrying across the newly planted fields. The children, tired from their play, leaned against their mothers, humming along softly. Around the crackling fire, they joined hands in a circle of prayer. William's steady voice led them in thanks for their blessings, the restored land, the promise of harvest, and most precious of all, the gift of family found in hardship. As the flames cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls, William gazed at the sisters' faces. His heart swelled with gratitude. The cabin that had once echoed with his solitary footsteps now hummed with life and love. These women and children, brought to him by desperate circumstance, had become his true family in the eyes of God. "We all want you, William," the widows whispered, their words carrying the weight of deep affection rather than the fear of that first snowy night. Their eyes shone with contentment, reflecting the firelight and the stronger warmth of belonging. William nodded, understanding that their words now spoke of the precious bonds of family, forged in winter's trials and strengthened by spring's promise of renewal. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.